Hello, respected viewers. Hello, it's George from Ireland. Well, welcome back to my channel. And it's marking 3 years since the Ukraine war. And I well remember waking up that morning, going out of the house, and getting these WhatsApp messages from a newspaper right for saying, come on, let's have your article about this one. So the CIA and MI6, they forecast the war was going to happen, and they said it's going to happen within 48 hours of giving this warning. It happened 24 hours after they predicted. So they're very accurate on that one. Now, I knew there was going to be a war. It didn't take a genius. Everybody knew that. I thought it was going to be a much smaller scale war. I mean, hey, I got to hold my hand up. I said the Russians would get to Kiev in 2 weeks. A lot of experts said in 2 days. I'm not an expert, and I thought it'd go on about 10 days because I compared it to the Georgian war in 2008 when Dmitry Medvedev was president of the Russian Federation during the Olympics, so much of the Olympic truce. But anyway, Ukraine is roughly 10 times the size of Georgia in territory and population. And that Russia would seize Kiev, install their puppet, probably bring back Yanukovych, and maybe be a lot of Ukraine east of the Dnieper. And that's as far as they would go because there was a massive military buildup on Ukraine's borders for months before this. You can't disguise that sort of mustering of forces, especially with spy satellites. And oh, this is just a training exercise. There's no threat to them at all. I mean, lie after lie after lie, and let that be a lesson to any of you who are stupid enough to trust Putin when he says, "Well, if you give me this, I won't attack again." And his spokesman Dmitry Peskov going out there to say, "Oh, there's no threat to anyone," and these war games turn into an actual war. Partly they're training for what they're about to do for real, but they thought they would face no opposition. They'd go through the Ukrainian military like a knife through hot butter, but it didn't turn out to be that way. And Russian media, they're constantly crowing they would be in Kiev in 2 days. And that's why on the first day of the war, there was a press communique released by the Russian government saying, that's it, we've done it. We've reunited Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. But that was so badly wrong. Within hours, that one was taken down. So it gives lie to the idea wanted to simply demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, as Putin claimed in his broadcast at 5 a.m. By the way, denazify meaning to end democracy. So anyone who doesn't agree with Putin on everything is a Nazi, according to him. Unfortunately, you see this sort of thing thrown around in Western countries a lot. So any right winger is labeled a Nazi by leftists. I mean, not all leftists that bad, which is sickening. And it's also the boy who cried wolf. Um, but the Ukrainians stood up much better than anyone forecast. The Russian military was far more incompetent than anyone had expected. That's partly because of corruption, because people had stolen and sold off fuel, winter tires. Often they had ration packs that had expired, or they didn't have enough ammunition. They'd been very poorly trained. They were ill-disciplined, looting houses. They didn't have sufficient rations. But they weren't equipped for the war they ended up fighting. Think it would be a victory parade to Kiev. It'd just be a walkover. That they took Crimea very, very easily. Only one person was killed in that. It'd be the same on just a larger scale, but that was dead wrong because Crimea is the most pro-Russian region in Ukraine when they seized that in 2014. And the Ukrainian military is much better equipped, better trained than it was 8 years earlier, and is better trained and better equipped than that since. And so that was it. So 5 weeks later, the Russians retreated with their tails between their legs. They just abandoned that attempt to take Kiev. So they were defeated often by things like javelins, these man-portable anti-tank weapons. Yeah, then they were driven back. But the Russians did have some success, especially breaking out of Crimea, getting much of the Zaporizhia region, the city of Kherson, where they had to withdraw from several months later. Now, Zelensky didn't turn and flee. He was offered to be evacuated by the United States. I thought maybe he should, because if he gets killed or perhaps worse, captured, would that not decapitate Ukraine? The thing is, he's got to survive. I mean, what about the soldiers? A lot of soldiers get killed. There's lots of soldiers. There's only one president. And if he's taken out, I mean, I suppose they got their line of succession. But he did survive, and they didn't panic, and that kept morale going. And against all the odds, they beat off the initial attack. There was a coup de main the Russians were attempting on Kiev, as in to seize an airfield, paratroopers, and then bring in a lot of troops who are non-paratroopers, just land them by planes. But the attempt to secure the airbase near Kiev failed, and that order went. They were informed of that, but nevertheless they went ahead with the plan. It says their rigidity, and so those planes were shot down. And so one of those planes was carrying 300 troops just dead like that. So very high Russian losses. But so they've switched to a long war strategy, and they'd have some success in the east, and they've all taken the whole of the Sea of Azov. There's that land corridor connecting them to Crimea. Now, I mean, obviously, I blame Biden for not threatening Putin with war beforehand, for not providing sufficient weaponry. That Kerch Strait bridge could have been taken down on day one, which would have made the war a lot more difficult for the Ruskies. Another thing is, all these sanctions came in, which have been less effectual than anticipated, less successful than I thought. They've still had an impact, an increasing impact. They could be tightened further. The enforcement is also very slack. It's been too easy to circumvent these, importing things via other countries, particularly former Soviet countries, which are very economically tied to Russia. The economic lens between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan make it almost impossible to resist Moscow's blandishments. But also places like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Armenia, Georgia, which had an increasingly pro-Moscow slant, and neutral countries like Turkey or the UAE, Iran. Well, they're very sanctions, so they can't really circumvent sanctions to help Russia. But yeah, so the long war strategy is just attritional warfare. And that was working for Russia up to a point. It's really slowed down now, but the conservative estimate about 220,000 killed on the Russian side, and like 3 times that number wounded. The Ukrainian side, it's something like 90,000 killed, maybe 4 times that number wounded, because partly because their medical services are better, so more of them survive on the Ukrainian side. But Ukraine will run out of people long before Russia will. Russians are getting killed, mostly people who are ethnic minority, poor, from isolated regions, or 2 or all 3 of those. Been more successful at recruiting people from Cuba, India, Nepal, whether by trickery or by honesty, and other countries. People from the former Soviet Union, like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, but the Kazakhs sometimes ethnic Russians and so forth. But yeah, so that's why not so many people have got killed. But yeah, economically, it'd be difficult for Russia to carry on to 2026. Either side could collapse, and it's difficult to see when that's going to happen. But I don't know anyone who predicted this be going on as a full-scale war 3 years later. Now, I think it will. There will at least be a ceasefire later this year, a major ceasefire for several months, maybe for several years. We'll see. I'm obviously not certain. This is educated guesswork, but we'll come on to how Trump has really played into Putin's hands lately. But it's horrific. We didn't think that we're going to see wars like this to attempt to change borders by force. The Iraq War, the Afghan War, what about these things? Okay, in neither case, the United States or any other country claim an inch of Iraq or Afghanistan for themselves. Didn't say it's part of their country. Russia is saying that much of Ukraine is part of Russia, that at least 5 regions of Ukraine have been annexed. Right, that is a gross violation of international law. We've agreed not to try and change borders by force. Any territorial disputes to be referred to the United Nations. Russia has repeatedly recognized the sovereign territory of Ukraine, including its current borders. So yeah, and that's just Putin reneging on his previous promises, treaties which were ratified by the Russian parliament, and so on. So it's monstrous. It's completely the fault of the Russian state and nobody else. And don't let anyone tell you different. Russia invaded Ukraine and not the other way around. And once that war started, yes, the Ukrainians crossed the border into Russia as they're entitled to do. But yeah, it's just an awful pity. Now, I recognize there is some plausibility. Some of the Russian claims of East Ukraine or Crimea, it's Ukrainian sovereign territory. If they had a referendum on a completely fair basis, it's almost certain that majority of Crimeans would vote to join Russia, and probably people in Lugansk and Donetsk likewise. But they don't automatically get what they want. It doesn't actually make it part of Russia, and Ukraine is not obliged to cede it, as previously bent over backwards to be accommodating to Russian feelings on this question. But anyway, more about Trump's latest foolish démarche. Well, thank you for watching my channel. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodaloo.